I'm a fourth year medical student. I have a scholarship that paid for tuition, and I signed on to come back and work here for 4 years after all my training is done. I'll be graduating with about 50K in student loans. My husband and I are very established here. We bought a house back in 2019, and our kids stay with grandparents, so we don't have any childcare expenses. If we move for residency, he would be unemployed. He does not work in medicine. What advice do you have for choosing relocating for residency versus staying and having all my education from one spot? Is it worth the financial strain and hustle if eventually we'd come back here anyways? Would it be detrimental to my negotiating power if my education is all from one place? Thank you for everything. Bye bye.
Great question. First of all, I'm going to push back on this idea that your spouse is going to be unemployed. The unemployment rate in the country right now is like 3%. The likelihood that your spouse cannot get a job someplace where you're going to residency seems extremely low to me. I guess it's possible. I don't know what your spouse does. Maybe something's happened to them. They're not very employable for some reason, but chances are that unemployment is going to be pretty temporary. What I've found with a lot of people too is, especially in this day and age of people working remotely, a lot of times that company wants you so bad, they don't care if you move. Like our tech guy. Our tech guy here at White Coat Investor used to live locally. Well, he moved away. We didn't fire him. He was working mostly from his own home anyway. So, lots of jobs are like that you can keep the same job even though you move away, especially if you tell them it's highly likely I'm coming back in a few years. Then they may bend over backwards because turnover is expensive. Nobody likes hiring and firing, and it's expensive, and you got to pay recruiters, and you don't have somebody for a few months. So a lot of employers, especially these days with unemployment so low, um, will bend over backwards to keep you. So I'm going to push back on that point. All right, but to answer the question you actually did ask, I got three factors that I think are important when you're choosing your residency. The first one is people. I think this is probably the most important part of choosing a residency. You want to go somewhere that you fit in, that you like the attendings, the staff members, that you like the other residents, that you fit in there, right? I went to some residencies. I'd been married at this point for 4 years and interviewed there. And, it was a great residency. The academics were great, but, all the residents were like, after shifts, they went out clubbing. Well, I wasn't really into clubbing, right? Everybody was single and they were into clubbing, and it just wasn't my thing. It wasn't a good fit. I was much better off, being in Tucson with a bunch of people where half the residents were married and everybody was into outdoorsy kind of stuff. I just fit better there, and I liked the faculty better, and all those things. So fit's number one. Number two is the quality of your training and the quality of your education. I think that really matters. If your local place is not that good of a residency, I think it's worth going somewhere else for sure. Because I think the quality of your training really matters. It's going to affect how good of a doc you are and the patient care you're going to give for the next 2 or 3 or 4 decades. And I think it's worth going to get that. And then the third thing is location. And location's important, right? Having family support around, like in your situation where you got grandparents to watch kids, where your husband already has a job. I mean, that's going to be that place where you're at now, assuming they have a residency program in your chosen specialty, which it sounds like they do. That's going to be pretty high on your list, no matter how much you like the program in another state. This one's still going to be second or third, I'm sure. And so I think that's fine. I think location is a really important thing to consider. And part of that is cost of living. Obviously, this location is a relatively low cost of living. I think your fear is that somehow this is going to hurt your career by going to med school and residency in the same place and staying on there for faculty, or, going into the community in that area. And there is, some benefits to going somewhere else and seeing different ways that people do things and seeing different patient populations, and not being quote unquote inbred in your training. But there's other factors too. I wouldn't put that in my top three, that it has to be someplace different than where you did medical school. It's not nearly as important as the people and the quality of the training and the location. But if all else is equal, sure, go someplace else, get a different experience. But I don't feel like that's so incredibly important that you have to do it. Now, that might not be the case. If you want a specific academic job in a specific specialty, maybe it's really important, to have Yale or Harvard or who knows what behind your name to get the job you really want. But I think for most of us docs, that just isn't the most important thing. So Sounds like you want to stay there. I suspect you're going to rank that program really high, and I think that's probably appropriate. But don't be afraid to look around. You might find something you like even more, and you're willing to sacrifice a little bit on the location to get people you like even better, or training that you think's a little bit better.
The hosts of The White Coat Investor are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is for your entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.